I was 72 years old when the lawyer placed those heavy iron keys in my trembling hands and said words that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my life. It's yours now. Look for his secret. For over 40 years, my husband had forbidden me from ever stepping foot inside that house in Savannah, Georgia. I had been the obedient wife, never questioning, never pushing, trusting that his reasons were valid. But now he was gone, and that locked door was calling to me like a ghost, demanding to be heard. When I finally gathered the courage to push open that door, what I found inside made my knees buckle and my heart stop. Photographs lined the walls, children with my husband's unmistakable blue eyes, children I had never seen before in my life. A whole world had existed parallel to mine, full of lives I knew nothing about, promises that were made and broken, and secrets so dark they had been literally carved into the walls and hidden behind picture frames. My husband hadn't just kept one secret from me. He had built an entire empire of lies, and I had been living in its shadow for decades without ever knowing. What I discovered in that house didn't just break my heart. It revealed a web of betrayal so deep, so cruel, that it would force me to question every moment of my 43-year marriage. And the worst part? My own family had known. They had all known, and they had watched me live that lie without saying a word. This is the story of how one forbidden house unlocked a lifetime of deception, and how I had to decide whether to protect the comfortable lies or fight for a painful truth. If you want to know what really happened behind that locked door, if you want to witness a story of betrayal, courage, and redemption that will stay with you long after it ends, then stay with me. Follow this channel so you never miss a story. Leave a like if you believe truth matters more than comfort, and comment below telling me where in the world you're watching from, because this journey is one you'll never forget. I was 72 years old when the lawyer handed me those heavy iron keys and said, "It's yours now. Look for his secret." My heart froze right there in his mahogany office, the afternoon light filtering through the blinds like prison bars. For over 40 years, my husband had forbidden me from setting foot in that house in Savannah, Georgia, and I had obeyed without ever asking why. I was a good wife. That's what women of my generation did. We trusted, we stayed quiet, we kept the peace. But now, widowed and alone in my small apartment in Charleston, that forgotten door called to me like a ghost I could no longer ignore. The drive to Savannah felt endless. My arthritic hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. Every mile marker felt like a countdown to something I wasn't sure I wanted to discover. The Spanish moss hung from the oak trees like gray curtains hiding secrets, and the humidity pressed against my chest like a warning. When I finally pulled up to the address on Habersham Street, my breath caught. The house was beautiful, a 3-story Victorian painted in faded yellow, with a wraparound porch and shutters that had seen better days. It looked like it had been waiting for someone to love it again. But why had he kept me away? I sat in my car for 20 minutes, staring at the front door, my fingers trembling around those cold keys. Part of me wanted to turn around, drive back to Charleston, and pretend this envelope from the lawyer had never arrived. Ignorance had been my companion for 4 decades. Why abandon her now? But something deeper, something raw and wounded inside me, needed to know. I needed to understand why the man I'd shared a bed with, cooked for, prayed beside, had kept an entire house secret from me. When I finally pushed open the front door, the air inside hit me like a wall. It was thick with dust and silence, the kind of silence that holds memories hostage. The floorboards creaked under my weight as if complaining about my presence, as if I was trespassing in a place that had never been meant for me. The downstairs was sparsely furnished. A worn couch, a coffee table with water rings, curtains that had once been white but were now the color of old photographs. Everything felt frozen in time, like a museum of a life I hadn't lived. My legs felt heavy as I climbed the stairs, each step an act of will. My doctor had told me to watch my blood pressure, to avoid stress, but how could I? How could I turn away from this? The wooden banister was smooth under my palm, polished by hands I'd never known. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched before me, and that's when I saw them. Pictures, framed photographs lining the wall like a gallery of strangers. My legs nearly gave out. I had to grab the banister to keep from falling. There were 4 of them, 3 boys and a girl, all with those unmistakable blue eyes. His eyes. The same eyes that had looked at me across the breakfast table for 43 years. The same eyes that had promised me forever on our wedding day in 1981. But these children, I had never seen them before in my life. The oldest boy looked about 12 in his photo, wearing a baseball uniform with Savannah shamrocks printed across the chest. The girl, maybe 9 or 10, had ribbons in her hair and was holding a stuffed rabbit. The 2 younger boys were in matching sailor outfits, grinning at the camera with missing front teeth. They all looked happy, loved, real. My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe. The hallway started to spin. Who were these children? I moved closer, my hand reaching out to touch the frame of the girl's portrait. And that's when I noticed something odd. Behind the frame, barely visible, there was writing on the wall. Someone had carved words into the plaster, then hung the picture over it, like they wanted to hide something but couldn't bring themselves to erase it completely. With shaking hands, I lifted the frame off its hook. The words were carved deep, deliberate. Forever our family. Our family, not my family, our family. The truth crashed over me like a wave I couldn't fight. My knees buckled and I sank to the floor right there in that hallway, surrounded by the faces of children who shared my husband's blood but not my life. The frame slipped from my fingers and clattered against the hardwood. Glass cracked. Behind me, through an open doorway, I could see into what looked like a child's bedroom, a twin bed with a faded quilt, toys still arranged on shelves, a growth chart marked on the doorframe. This wasn't just a house. This was a home. His home. With them. I don't know how long I sat there on that floor, my back against the wall, staring at those photographs. Minutes? Hours. Time had lost all meaning. All I knew was that the man I'd buried 6 months ago, the man whose funeral I'd planned, whose hand I'd held as he took his last breath, whose name was engraved next to mine on a cemetery plot, had been a stranger, and I had never known. My mind raced backward through the years, all those business trips, the weekends he said he needed to spend at the lumber company in Georgia, the phone calls he'd take in the garage, the distant look in his eyes sometimes at dinner like he was somewhere else entirely. I had written it off as work stress, as the burden of being a provider. I had been so naive, so trusting, so stupid. A sound downstairs made me freeze. A door closing, footsteps. "Hello?" A woman's voice called out. "Is someone there?" My heart hammered against my ribs. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. The footsteps grew closer, climbing the stairs. I wanted to run, to hide, but I was trapped. An intruder in a life that had existed parallel to mine for decades. A woman appeared at the top of the stairs. She was maybe in her early 50s with graying hair pulled back in a bun and kind eyes that went wide when she saw me on the floor. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You must be Eleanor." She knew my name. This stranger knew my name. "Who are you?" I managed to choke out. The woman's face softened with something that looked like pity mixed with relief. She took a step closer, her hand reaching out like she wanted to help me up but wasn't sure if she should touch me. "My name is Margaret," she said quietly. I was their nanny. Margaret helped me to my feet that day, her hands surprisingly strong for someone who looked so gentle. She guided me downstairs to the kitchen, made me sweet tea the way only Southern women know how, with enough sugar to coat your teeth and enough love to make you believe everything might be okay. But nothing was okay. Nothing would ever be okay again. "How long did you work for him?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The words tasted bitter in my mouth. Margaret sat across from me at the small kitchen table, her fingers wrapped around her own glass. She looked tired, like she'd been carrying a heavy secret far too long and was finally about to set it down. 15 years, she said, from 1985 until 2000. The children needed someone when Catherine passed away. Catherine. Even her name felt like a knife twisting in my chest. My husband had another wife. No, not another wife. He'd never divorced her, which meant what exactly? That I was the other woman, that our marriage was a lie. The tea suddenly tasted like poison. Tell me everything, I demanded, surprised by the steel in my own voice. I need to know everything. Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. She told me about Catherine, a school teacher with a laugh that could fill a room, who'd met my husband in 1976 at a church social in Savannah. They'd fallen in love, gotten married quietly, had 4 children in rapid succession. She told me about Sunday dinners and birthday parties, about a man who coached Little League and attended every school play. She painted a picture of a life that sounded exactly like the one I thought I'd been living, except it was real, and mine was just a shadow. But he was married to me, I said, my hands shaking so badly I had to set down my glass. We got married in 1981. How could he? I don't know, Margaret interrupted softly. I swear to you, Eleanor, I didn't know about you until after he died. The children didn't know. Catherine never knew. He kept you completely separate. Different cities, different lives, different worlds. I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the floor. The room spun, and I had to grip the counter to steady myself. My heart was pounding too hard, too fast. My doctor's warnings echoed in my head, but I couldn't think about that now. All I could think about was how thoroughly I'd been deceived. I need to talk to people who knew him here, I said. Neighbors, friends, someone who can help me understand how this was even possible. Margaret's face darkened. Eleanor, I'm not sure that's a good idea. This community, they protected him. They protect their own. But I didn't listen. I couldn't listen. The next morning, I drove through the neighborhood knocking on doors with Margaret's reluctant directions scribbled on a piece of paper. The first 3 houses, no one answered, even though I could see curtains moving, could feel eyes watching me from behind lace panels. At the 4th house, an elderly man opened the door just wide enough to peer out. I'm looking for information about my husband, I started. He owned the house on... The door slammed in my face before I could finish. At the 5th house, a woman in her 60s answered. She looked me up and down with cold eyes, her mouth pressed into a thin line. We don't talk about that family anymore, she said. Best if you leave it alone. But I need to understand. You need to leave, she said firmly, and closed the door with a soft click that somehow felt louder than a slam. Every door I knocked on gave me the same treatment. Averted eyes, whispered conversations that stopped the moment I approached. People crossing the street to avoid me. It was like the entire neighborhood had made a pact of silence, and I was the unwelcome intruder trying to break it. I felt invisible and exposed all at once, like I was walking through a town that had already decided I didn't deserve answers. On Sunday, desperate and exhausted, I went to the farmer's market on Forsyth Park. I thought maybe in a public place, surrounded by the normalcy of people buying fresh tomatoes and homemade jam, someone would talk to me. I wandered between the stalls, my eyes scanning faces, looking for any hint of recognition or sympathy. That's when I felt a hand on my arm. I turned to find a woman in her 70s wearing a faded floral dress and a straw hat that had seen better days. Her face was deeply lined, and her eyes held a sadness that seemed to go bone deep. "You're Eleanor," she whispered, glancing around nervously like she was afraid of being seen talking to me. "You're his wife from Charleston." "Yes," I breathed. "Please, if you know something, you should have discovered this sooner," she said, her voice urgent and low. She leaned closer, and I could smell lavender perfume mixed with something like fear. They suffered too, those children. When Catherine died, he promised to take care of them. He promised. Her grip on my arm tightened. But men like him, they're good at promises and bad at keeping them. You should ask yourself what else he was hiding. What else he promised and never delivered. "Wait," I said, reaching for her as she started to pull away. "Please, what do you mean? Who are you?" But she was already moving backward into the crowd, shaking her head. "I've already said too much. They'll know I talked to you. Just be careful. This town has a long memory and sharp teeth." She disappeared between the vegetable stalls, swallowed by the crowd of Sunday shoppers. leaving me standing there with more questions than answers and a growing sense of dread that settled in my stomach like stones. I drove back to the house on Habersham Street, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. Not even when my husband died had I felt this isolated. At least then, I'd had my grief and my memories to keep me company, false though they turned out to be. Now I had nothing but a neighborhood full of people who seemed to blame me for crimes I didn't even know I'd committed. That night, lying in the guest bedroom of that strange house, I stared at the ceiling and tried to understand. Why wouldn't they talk to me? What were they protecting? And more importantly, what had that woman meant when she said they suffered too? The children in those photographs had looked happy, loved. So what had gone wrong? And why did I feel like everyone in Savannah knew the answer except me? Sleep wouldn't come that night. I lay in that unfamiliar bed, in that house full of ghosts, listening to every creak and groan of the old Victorian bones settling around me. The shadows on the ceiling seemed to shift and move like they were alive, like they were whispering secrets I couldn't quite hear. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those children's faces from the photographs, their blue eyes staring at me with questions I couldn't answer. Around 3 a.m, I gave up on sleep entirely. I wrapped myself in the thin robe I'd packed and padded downstairs in my slippers. The wooden floors cold, even through the fabric. The house felt different at night, more alive somehow, or maybe more honest. During the day, it pretended to be just a building, just walls and windows and doors. But at night, it breathed with the weight of all the years and all the lies it had sheltered. I made myself chamomile tea that I didn't really want, and sat at the kitchen table watching the first hints of dawn creep through the lace curtains. That's when I noticed something I'd missed before. In the corner of the kitchen, partially hidden behind an old broom, there was a small door, the kind that usually led to a pantry or storage closet. My curiosity pulled me forward like a fish on a line. The door stuck at first, swollen with humidity and age, but when I finally wrenched it open, I found narrow stairs leading up into darkness. An attic. Of course there would be an attic. Old houses like this always had attics, places where families stored their memories and their mistakes, where the past went to gather dust and wait. I should have waited for daylight. I should have waited for Margaret to return. But something inside me, some desperate, aching need to understand, pushed me up those stairs. I found a light switch at the top, and a single bare bulb flickered to life, casting long shadows across a space crammed with boxes, old furniture, and the debris of a life I'd never been part of. The attic smelled like mothballs and old paper and something else I couldn't quite name. Maybe sadness, if sadness had a smell. There were boxes labeled Christmas decorations and children's clothes and Catherine's books. Each label felt like a small violence, a reminder that there had been a whole world here that existed without me, that had no need of me, that would have been perfectly happy if I'd never existed at all. I started opening boxes almost frantically, my hands shaking as I pulled back cardboard flaps and tore through tissue paper. I found report cards with gold stars and teacher's notes saying, "Excellent work." I found birthday cards signed, "Love Always, Dad," in handwriting I recognized as intimately as my own face. I found a Mother's Day card made from construction paper and macaroni with "To the best mom ever" written in a child's careful printing. Each item was a knife. Each discovery bled me a little more. But then pushed far back under the eaves where the ceiling sloped down low, I found a wooden box. It was made of cherry wood, beautiful and carefully crafted, with brass hinges that had tarnished to green, that there was a small lock on the front, the old-fashioned kind that took a skeleton key. My heart started racing. This was different from the other boxes. This one was locked. This one was hidden. I tried to pry it open with my fingernails, but the lock held firm. I searched frantically through the attic, through drawers and boxes, my breath coming in short gasps that made my chest hurt. Finally, on a high shelf behind some old curtains, I found a coffee can full of old keys. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped it twice before I managed to get it open, keys spilling across the dusty floor with a sound like bones rattling. I tried key after key, my frustration mounting with each failure, until finally, one of them slid home with a satisfying click. The lock opened. I lifted the lid with trembling hands, not sure if I wanted to see what was inside, or if I wanted to throw the whole box out the window and run back to Charleston and pretend none of this had ever happened. Inside were letters, dozens of them tied together with blue ribbon that had faded to gray. Beneath the letters were photographs, more of them, showing the children at different ages, showing Catherine with her arm around my husband, both of them smiling like they had the whole world figured out. And at the very bottom, folded carefully and yellowed with age, was a single sheet of paper covered in my husband's distinctive angular handwriting. My hands shook as I unfolded it. The paper was so old it crackled, threatening to tear at the creases. The date at the top read September 15th, 1999, almost exactly 1 year before the millennium, during a time when I thought we'd been planning our retirement together, talking about buying a little place in the mountains. "To whoever finds this," it began, and even though he'd been dead for 6 months, seeing his words felt like he was in the room with me, watching me discover his betrayal all over again. "If you are reading this, it is because I did not have the courage to fix what I broke. I have lived 2 lives, and in doing so, I have destroyed them both. Catherine deserved better. Eleanor deserved better. My children deserved a father who was present, not a ghost who appeared and disappeared like smoke." I had to stop reading. My vision blurred with tears, and my chest felt like someone was standing on it. I pressed my hand against my heart, feeling it thunder against my ribs. "Breathe," I told myself. "Just breathe." But how do you breathe when the air itself feels like poison? I forced myself to continue. "The guilt eats at me every day. When I am with Catherine and the children, I think of Eleanor alone in Charleston. When I am with Eleanor, I see my children's faces and know I am missing another baseball game, another recital, another moment I can never get back. I am present nowhere because I'm trying to be everywhere. I'm a husband to no one because I'm trying to be a husband to 2. The words blurred again. I wiped my eyes roughly with the back of my hand and kept reading. "Catherine is sick now. The cancer has spread, and the doctors say there is nothing more they can do. She still does not know about Eleanor. The children do not know. I have kept my 2 worlds separate for so long that I do not know how to bring them together. And what would be the point? To ease my conscience by destroying everyone else's peace." My breath caught. Catherine had been dying when he wrote this. She had been dying, and he still couldn't tell the truth. If something happens to me, if I die before I can make this right, they deserve justice. The children deserve to know they were not abandoned. They deserve their inheritance. They deserve to know their father was a coward, but he loved them. God help me, I loved them all, and that was my greatest sin. The letter ended there. No signature, no explanation of what making it right meant or how he'd planned to do it. Just those final words hanging in the air like smoke. They deserve justice. Beneath the letter, at the very bottom of the box, I found 2 birth certificates. Not 4, 2. I picked them up with trembling fingers and held them up to the light. They were for boys, twins, born in Atlanta in 1987. Their last name was my husband's, but their mother's name on the certificates made my blood run cold. It wasn't Catherine's name. It wasn't mine either. There had been a 3rd woman. I don't remember climbing down from the attic. I don't remember how I got to the kitchen or how long I sat there staring at those birth certificates, the paper growing damp from my tears. The names swam before my eyes. Jacob and Joshua, born April 3rd, 1987. Their mother was listed as Rebecca Thornton, a 3rd woman, a 3rd life. How many more were there? How many more secrets was I going to unearth from the rotting foundation of my marriage? The sun had fully risen by the time I heard my phone ringing. It took me 3 tries to answer it, my fingers numb and clumsy. It was my nephew, Daniel, my sister's son, who'd always been closer to my husband than to me, if I was being honest. They'd gone fishing together, watched football games, talked about business and investments in ways that made me feel small and invisible. "Aunt Eleanor," his voice came through sharp and urgent. "I heard you're in Savannah. What the hell are you doing there?" The question caught me off guard. How did he even know where I was? I'd told no one, not even my sister. How did you— That doesn't matter, he cut me off. You need to come home. Now. You're making a mistake digging into this. Something in his tone made my spine straighten. It wasn't concern I heard, it was fear. And underneath the fear, something else. Anger. What do you know about this house, Daniel? Silence stretched between us so long I thought the call had dropped. Then quietly, almost too quietly, Uncle Jim asked me to help him with some legal paperwork. Years ago, that's all. It's none of your business. None of my business. My voice rose, cracking with emotion. He was my husband. This is absolutely my business. You don't understand what you're dealing with, Daniel said, and now his voice had turned cold. There are other people involved, other families, other— He stopped abruptly, like he'd said too much. Other what? I demanded. Other lies? Other children? Tell me what you know, Daniel. Forget about that house, he said, and his voice had turned hard as stone. Sell it, take the money, and forget any of this ever happened. Trust me, Aunt Eleanor. You don't want to open this door. Why? Because you helped him hide it. Because you knew what he was doing and you said nothing. The silence that followed felt damning. When Daniel finally spoke again, his voice shook with barely controlled rage. You have no idea what you're talking about. Uncle Jim did what he had to do to take care of everyone. He worked himself to death trying to provide for all of you. And this is how you repay him. By dragging his name through the mud. He lied to me for 40 years. I screamed into the phone, not caring that my voice was shrill, not caring about anything except the white-hot fury burning through my veins. He had entire families I knew nothing about. He had children who— Those children have nothing to do with you, Daniel interrupted coldly. Nothing. Whatever the lawyer told you, whatever you think you found, it doesn't change your life. You were taken care of. You had everything you needed. So just leave it alone. He hung up before I could respond, the dial tone buzzing in my ear like an angry wasp. I sat there holding the phone, my whole body trembling with rage and shock. Daniel knew. My own family knew. How many others had been in on the secret? How many people had looked me in the eye over Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings, had hugged me and called me family, all while knowing I was living a lie? The house suddenly felt suffocating. I needed air. I needed to move. I grabbed my purse and the birth certificates and walked out the front door, not caring that I was still in my nightgown with just a cardigan thrown over it. I got in my car and just drove, with no destination in mind, just needing to feel like I was going somewhere, anywhere, away from that house and its secrets. I ended up at Forsyth Park without meaning to, my car finding its way there like it had its own memory. I parked under the sprawling oaks and sat there, watching people jog past, walk their dogs, push strollers with babies who had no idea how complicated life was about to get for them. Everything looked so normal, so peaceful, like the world wasn't crumbling beneath my feet. That's when the chest pain started. At first it was just a tightness, like someone had wrapped a band around my ribs and was slowly pulling it tighter. I tried to breathe through it, but the pain spread, radiating up into my jaw and down my left arm. My vision started to blur at the edges. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers thick and clumsy, but I couldn't seem to make them work properly. A jogger noticed me slumped over my steering wheel and came running. I heard knocking on my window, heard voices shouting, but they sounded far away, like I was underwater. The last thing I remember before everything went dark was thinking, absurdly, that I couldn't die yet. Not before I understood. Not before I knew the whole truth. I woke up in Savannah Memorial Hospital with an IV in my arm, and a young doctor with kind eyes telling me I'd had a severe panic attack that had mimicked a heart attack. My blood pressure had spiked dangerously high. I was dehydrated and exhausted, and in his professional opinion, much stress for a woman my age. You need to take it easy, he said gently. Whatever is going on in your life, it's not worth dying over. But that was where he was wrong. Because lying in that hospital bed, staring at the white ceiling tiles and listening to the beep of the monitors, I realized something. I had spent my entire marriage taking it easy, being the good wife, not asking questions, not making waves. And where had it gotten me? To a hospital bed in a strange city, discovering that my entire life had been built on sand. When they released me the next morning with prescriptions for blood pressure medication and anxiety pills, I drove straight back to Habersham Street. Margaret was there, pacing on the front porch, her face drawn with worry. "Oh, thank God," she said when she saw me. "I heard what happened. Eleanor, you need to stop this. You need to take care of yourself." "I need answers," I said, pushing past her into the house. "And I'm not stopping until I get them." That night, I couldn't sleep again. My mind kept returning to those birth certificates, to that third woman's name, Rebecca Thornton. Who was she? Where was she now? And where were her sons? My husband's sons, Jacob and Joshua, who would be in their 30s now. Around midnight, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate footsteps, like someone was pacing back and forth. I crept to the window and peeked through the curtains, my heart hammering in my chest. There was a man standing under the streetlight, staring up at the house. He was tall and broad-shouldered, maybe in his 50s, and even from a distance, I could see he had my husband's profile. The same strong jaw, the same way of standing with his weight shifted to one side. He stood there for what felt like forever, just staring. Then he pulled out his phone, made a call, and I heard his voice carry on the quiet night air. "She's here. She found the house. What do you want me to do?" A pause. "I understand. I'll take care of it." He hung up, looked at the house one more time, with an expression I couldn't read from this distance, then walked away into the darkness. I stood frozen at that window long after he'd disappeared, my whole body shaking. Who was he? What did "take care of it" mean? And who had he been talking to? For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt real fear. Not just emotional pain or shock or betrayal, but actual physical fear for my safety. What had I stumbled into? I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every sound made me jump. The house settling, branches scraping against windows, cars passing on the street. I kept seeing that man's silhouette under the streetlight, kept hearing those words, "I'll take care of it." What did that mean? Was I in danger? Was I being paranoid, my mind creating threats where none existed because I was exhausted and traumatized and barely holding myself together? By the time dawn broke, I'd made a decision. I couldn't hide in this house anymore, jumping at shadows and waiting for answers to find me. I needed to be proactive. I needed to find Rebecca Thornton and those twin boys whose birth certificates I'd discovered. They were out there somewhere, living their lives, and they deserved to know. What? That their father had lied to everyone? That he'd died still keeping secrets? Margaret arrived around 8 with breakfast she'd picked up from a cafe downtown. Biscuits and gravy, sweet tea, peach cobbler, the kind of comfort food Southern women bring when words aren't enough. She took one look at my face and knew I hadn't slept. "You look like death warmed over," she said bluntly, setting the food on the kitchen table. "Eleanor, you're going to make yourself really sick if you keep this up." "Someone was here last night," I told her, my voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "A man. He was watching the house. He made a phone call and said he'd take care of it." Margaret's face went pale. She sank into a chair, her hands trembling as she reached for her tea. "Did you see what he looked like? Tall, maybe 50s. He had—" I swallowed hard. "He had Jim's profile, the same way of standing." "Oh, God," Margaret whispered. "That was probably Thomas, Catherine's oldest boy. He'd be 52 now." My heart clenched. One of the children from the photographs, all grown up. My husband's son. Why would he be watching the house? Why would he say he'd take care of something? Margaret looked away, unable to meet my eyes. The children. After Catherine died, things got complicated. "Your husband promised to take care of them, but—" She trailed off, her fingers nervously shredding a napkin into tiny pieces. "But what?" I pressed. "He gave them some money, put them through college, but then he just stopped. Said he couldn't afford to support 2 households anymore. Thomas had to drop out of medical school in his final year. The girl, Sarah, she lost her house during the financial crisis and your husband refused to help. The younger boys never got the education funds he promised. The room spun. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. He told me we needed to be careful with money. He said we couldn't afford to travel, couldn't afford to renovate the house. I wore the same winter coat for 15 years because he said we needed to save. "I'm sorry," Margaret said, and she sounded like she meant it. "I'm so sorry you're finding out this way." But I was done being sorry, done being the victim. I stood up, grabbed my purse, and headed for the door. "Where does Thomas live?" "Eleanor, no. That's not a good idea. If he was here making threats..." "I need to talk to him," I said firmly. "I need to look him in the eye and hear the truth from someone who actually lived it." Margaret tried to argue, but eventually, she gave me an address in a neighborhood on the outskirts of Savannah. The drive there felt surreal, like I was in a movie about someone else's life. The houses got smaller and more run down as I drove, the manicured lawns giving way to patchy grass and chain-link fences. I pulled up to a modest ranch-style house with peeling paint and a mailbox that listed to one side. My hands were shaking as I walked up the cracked concrete path. I could hear a television playing inside, the sound of canned laughter from some daytime talk show. I raised my fist to knock, hesitated for just a moment, then forced myself to do it. 3 sharp raps that sounded louder than they should have. The door opened almost immediately, like he'd been waiting for me. And there he was, the man from last night, looking older in the daylight, with gray threading through his dark hair and deep lines around his eyes. But those eyes, those were my husband's eyes, the same shade of blue, the same intensity. "I wondered when you'd come," he said, his voice rough like he'd been up all night too. "Figured it was only a matter of time." "You were watching the house last night," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You made a phone call. You said you'd take care of something. What did you mean?" Thomas studied me for a long moment, and I couldn't read the expression on his face. Pain, anger, resignation, maybe all 3. Finally, he stepped back and gestured inside. "You might as well come in. We should talk." The inside of his house was clean but sparse, the kind of place that spoke of making do, of stretching every dollar. There was a worn couch with a blanket thrown over it to hide the tears in the upholstery, a coffee table with water rings, photographs on the mantel that I recognized from the house on Habersham Street. The same children, just in different frames. "I called my sister," Thomas said, settling into an armchair and gesturing for me to take the couch. "Sarah, to tell her you were here, asking questions. That's what you heard. I'll take care of it meant I'd handle talking to you so she didn't have to." Relief washed over me so intensely, I almost laughed. I thought you were threatening me." "Threatening you?" He looked genuinely surprised. "Lady, I don't even know you, but I know you're just as much a victim here as we were. Maybe more, because at least we knew our mother. You got the lies without even getting the good parts." His words hit harder than any accusation could have. I felt tears burning behind my eyes and blinked them back furiously. "Tell me about your mother, about Catherine." And he did. For the next hour, Thomas painted a picture of a woman who'd been a second-grade teacher, who'd made the best pecan pie in Chatham County, who'd volunteered at the animal shelter every Saturday and sang in the church choir on Sundays. He told me about a father who'd been present but distant, who'd shown up for the important moments but missed so many of the small ones, who'd always had an excuse for why he couldn't make it to dinner, why he had to leave early, why he'd be gone for days at a time. "When Mom got sick," Thomas said, his voice breaking, "she begged him to stay, to just be there with her. But he kept leaving, kept saying he had business to handle. We didn't understand until later that the business was you, that he was going back to Charleston to another wife, to another life." "I didn't know," I whispered. "I swear to God I didn't know any of you existed." "I believe you," he said, and surprisingly it sounded sincere. "But it doesn't change what happened. He promised to take care of us after Mom died. Set up trust funds, he said. Make sure we had what we needed. But then the money just stopped. I had to leave medical school 6 months before graduation. 6 months. Do you know what that's like? To be so close and have it ripped away?" The bitterness in his voice was like acid. I understood it. God help me. I understood it completely because I felt it too. That rage at being promised something and having it stolen by circumstances beyond your control. I didn't get any of it, I said. The money, I mean. He told me we had to be careful, that his business was struggling. I worked part-time at a library for 20 years to help make ends meet. I thought we were barely getting by. Thomas laughed, but it was a hollow sound with no humor in it. Then where the hell did it all go? Because it sure as hell didn't go to us, and apparently it didn't go to you either. We sat there in silence, two strangers connected by the same man's lies, both of us trying to piece together a puzzle that seemed to have missing pieces. Finally, I pulled out the birth certificates I'd found, the ones for Jacob and Joshua, Rebecca Thornton's sons. "Do you know anything about these?" I asked, handing them to Thomas. His face went white. His hands started shaking so badly he almost dropped the papers. When he looked up at me, his eyes were filled with something that looked like horror. "Where did you find these?" he whispered. "In the attic, hidden in a locked box. Who is Rebecca Thornton?" Thomas stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and staring out at the street like he was looking for an escape route. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "She was my mother's best friend." The words hung in the air like smoke, choking me. Rebecca Thornton was Catherine's best friend. My husband had betrayed his wife not just with me, a woman in another city who knew nothing, but with her closest friend. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. "Tell me everything," I said, my voice coming out harder than I intended. "I need to know everything." Thomas turned from the window, his face aged by the weight of secrets he'd been carrying. He ran his hand through his hair, the same gesture my husband used to make when he was stressed, and it sent a chill down my spine. How many of his mannerisms had been passed down to these children I'd never known existed? "Rebecca lived 3 houses down from us," he began, settling back into his chair, like the story was too heavy to tell standing up. "She and Mom were inseparable. They'd have coffee every morning, watch each other's kids, go to the same book club. Rebecca's husband traveled for work. He was in the military, stationed overseas for months at a time. She was lonely, I think. And Dad was always good at finding lonely women. The observation cut like a knife because it was true. I had been lonely too when I met him. A young woman who'd moved to Charleston for a teaching job, far from family, desperate for connection. He'd swept me off my feet with his attention, his promises, his seeming devotion. Now I wondered if I'd just been another Mark, another woman whose loneliness he could exploit. "It started in 1986, as far as I know," Thomas continued. "Mom was pregnant with the twins, my younger brothers, Michael and David. She was having a difficult pregnancy, on bed rest for months. Rebecca would come over to help, and Dad was there more often than usual because Mom needed him. I was 14 then, old enough to notice things. The way Dad and Rebecca would look at each other when they thought no one was watching. The way he'd find excuses to walk her home, even though it was just 3 houses away." "Your mother didn't know?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. If Catherine had known, surely she would have ended the friendship, ended the marriage, unless she'd been like me, too trusting, too willing to believe the best in the man she loved. If she knew, she never said anything. But Rebecca got pregnant that fall, told everyone her husband was the father, that he'd been home on leave in January. The timing worked out just barely enough that no one questioned it. The twins, Jacob and Joshua, were born in April 1987, just 3 weeks after my brothers were born. The timeline clicked into place in my mind with horrible clarity. While Catherine was recovering from giving birth to twins, my husband was celebrating the birth of 2 more sons with her best friend. And during all of this, he was also married to me in Charleston, taking me to dinner on weekends, making love to me, planning what I thought was our future together. "Rebecca's husband came home that summer," Thomas said, his voice dropping lower. "He took one look at those babies and knew they didn't look anything like him. They looked exactly like Dad. He filed for divorce immediately, moved back to wherever he was from originally. Nebraska, I think. Rebecca was left alone with twin infants and no support." "And your father helped her?" I asked, though I could already guess the answer. "For a while. He set her up in an apartment in Atlanta, far enough away that no one in Savannah would make the connection. He'd tell Mom he had business trips, tell you God knows what, and go visit Rebecca and the boys. But it couldn't last. Too many lies, too many lives to juggle. By the time the boys were 5, he'd stopped visiting, stopped sending money. Rebecca had to work 3 jobs to keep them fed. The room felt like it was closing in on me. My chest was tight again, that same feeling I'd had before the panic attack. But I forced myself to breathe through it. I couldn't fall apart now, not when I was finally getting answers. What happened to them? To Rebecca and the boys? Thomas's face darkened. Rebecca died in 1995. Car accident on I-85 during an ice storm. She was driving home from her night shift at a hotel. The boys were only 8 years old. They went into foster care because Dad refused to claim them, refused to even acknowledge they existed. The horror of it washed over me in waves. 2 8-year-old boys, orphaned and abandoned, sent into a system that was already overburdened and underfunded. While I was living in my comfortable house in Charleston, while my husband was taking me on our anniversary trip to Hilton Head, those children were being shuffled from home to home, wondering why their father wouldn't come for them. "Did you know them?" I whispered. "Did you know your half-brothers?" "We met them once," Thomas said, and his voice cracked with emotion. In 1994, a year before Rebecca died, she showed up at our house one Sunday after church. Mom had just been diagnosed with cancer, stage 3, they said, but there was still hope for treatment. Rebecca came to the door with these 2 little boys, and she was crying, begging Dad to help her, to at least acknowledge his sons. I remember Mom's face when she realized what was happening, the betrayal, the devastation. It killed something in her that day, I think, something that the cancer couldn't touch. I felt tears streaming down my face, but I didn't wipe them away. I let them fall, each one a small acknowledgement of the pain my husband had caused to so many people. What did he do? He gave Rebecca $5,000 and told her to never come back, told her that if she ever contacted us again, he'd make sure she lost custody of the boys. She left, and we never saw her again until Mom's funeral a year later. Rebecca came, stood in the back, didn't say a word, just watched them lower the casket into the ground, then left. 6 months after that, she was dead too. The silence that followed felt sacred somehow, like we were both mourning not just for the people who'd died, but for the innocence we'd lost, the trust that had been shattered beyond repair. "I tried to find Jacob and Joshua after Dad died," Thomas said quietly. "Thought maybe we could, I don't know, be brothers properly, make up for lost time. But they'd been adopted by different families. The system split them up. I found Joshua in Arizona. He's a mechanic, has 3 kids, wants nothing to do with any of us. Says our father destroyed his life, and he doesn't need more reminders. I never found Jacob." "There's more you're not telling me," I said, recognizing the same look my husband used to get when he was holding something back. "What is it?" Thomas reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He scrolled through it for a moment, then turned it toward me. On the screen was a photograph of a document, a will dated 2010, written in my husband's handwriting. "I found this in the house after Dad died," Thomas said, "before the lawyer got there, before everything became official. He'd hidden it in the same place you found those birth certificates." Read it. My hands shook as I took the phone and read the words on the screen. The will laid out a plan to divide everything equally among all his children, Catherine's 4, Rebecca's twins, and any others who could prove paternity. It promised to establish a trust fund, to provide for their education, to make amends for his failures as a father. But at the bottom, in different ink like it had been added later, there was a note. "I don't have the courage to do this while I'm alive. I failed them all. Eleanor deserves to know the truth, but I'm too much of a coward to tell her. Let the lawyers handle it after I'm gone. Let someone else be brave for me." "He never filed it," I whispered. "This isn't the official will." "No," Thomas confirmed. "The official will left everything to you. This was just another one of his fantasies, imagining himself as a good man, a fair man, without actually having to do the work of being one. I kept it because I thought maybe, somehow, I could use it to contest the official will, To get my siblings what they were promised. Then why didn't you? Thomas laughed bitterly. Because my uncle, Dad's brother, is a lawyer. He threatened to drag this through courts for years, to bankrupt me with legal fees, to destroy what little reputation our family had left. He said Dad had provided for us enough while we were young, and we had no legal claim to anything more. He said you were the legal widow, and that was that. My nephew Daniel, of course. He'd known about this. He'd been part of the cover-up, part of the machinery that kept my husband's secrets buried even after death. We need to make this right, I said, the decision crystallizing in my mind with sudden clarity. Whatever it takes, those children, your siblings, my husband's children, they deserve justice. It's too late, Thomas said wearily. The estate was settled months ago. The money's been distributed, there's nothing left to fight over. But he was wrong, because sitting in that house in Savannah was a property worth at least $500,000. And in my bank account in Charleston was the insurance money, the savings, the proceeds from selling our house. Money I'd thought was rightfully mine, but now understood was built on the suffering of children who'd been abandoned and betrayed. It's not too late, I said firmly. Help me find them, all of them. We're going to do what your father should have done 30 years ago. The moment I announced my intention to redistribute the inheritance, my family turned on me like wolves. My sister called me a fool. My nephew Daniel threatened to have me declared mentally incompetent. Cousins I hadn't heard from in years suddenly emerged from the woodwork, all of them with opinions about what I should do with my money. But it had never really been mine, had it? It was blood money, built on the backs of abandoned children and betrayed women. Thomas helped me find a lawyer. Not his uncle, obviously, but a woman named Patricia Chen, who specialized in estate disputes and had a reputation for taking on cases other lawyers wouldn't touch. She listened to my story in her downtown Savannah office, her face impassive, taking notes in neat handwriting that reminded me of my own back when I was still a teacher. What you're proposing is legally complicated, Patricia said when I'd finished. The estate has already been settled. You received everything as the legal widow. Technically, you have no obligation to share any of it. But morally, I started. Morally is a different question entirely, she interrupted gently, and one I can't answer for you. But if you're determined to do this, I can help you structure it properly. We'll need to track down all the children, verify paternity where necessary, and then you'll need to voluntarily redistribute your assets. It won't be a legal judgment, it will be your choice. That's exactly what I want, I said firmly. His choice was to lie and abandon them. My choice is to make it right. The process took 3 months. 3 months of investigations and DNA tests and lawyers sending letters to addresses all over the country. 3 months of my family's rage escalating with each passing day. Daniel showed up at the house in Savannah twice, both times shouting about how I was disrespecting his uncle's memory, how I was being manipulated by people who just wanted money, how I was too old and too emotional to be making these kinds of decisions. The second time, I called the police. Watching my own nephew being escorted off the property by 2 officers was one of the most painful moments of my life, but also strangely liberating. I was done being the obedient woman who kept quiet to keep the peace. That woman had died the day the lawyer handed me those keys. We found 5 of the 6 children. Thomas, of course, along with his sister Sarah, who'd lost her home in the 2008 financial crisis and was now working 2 jobs just to keep her family afloat. The younger twins, Michael and David, both lived in Florida. One was a high school teacher struggling with student loan debt. The other was a veteran dealing with PTSD and medical bills he couldn't pay. And we found Joshua, Rebecca's son, in Phoenix, the mechanic with 3 kids and a chip on his shoulder the size of Texas. Jacob remained a ghost. No one had seen or heard from him in over a decade. The last known address was a homeless shelter in Atlanta. After that, nothing. It was like he'd simply vanished, swallowed up by a system that had failed him from the moment his mother died. Patricia scheduled a meeting at the courthouse in Savannah for all parties involved. Not a trial, exactly, but close enough. A mediation hearing where we could discuss the redistribution officially, make sure everyone understood what was being proposed, and give people a chance to object or ask questions. The day of the hearing, I woke up at 5 in the morning, my stomach in knots. I'd barely slept, my mind running through every possible scenario, every way this could go wrong. What if they rejected the money? What if they hated me for being associated with their father's lies? What if Daniel showed up and caused a scene? I put on my best dress, navy blue with pearl buttons, the one I'd worn to my husband's funeral, and drove to the courthouse with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles ached. The building was imposing, all columns and marble steps, the kind of place designed to make you feel small and insignificant. Inside, the hallways echoed with footsteps and hushed conversations. Lawyers in expensive suits rushing past with briefcases. Families huddled together looking terrified or defiant or both. Patricia met me outside the mediation room. "Everyone's here except Joshua," she said quietly. "He's still deciding if he wants to come. And your nephew Daniel is here with his own lawyer." My heart sank. "He can't stop this, can he?" "No. You have the legal right to do whatever you want with your assets. But he can make noise, make accusations, try to poison the well." She squeezed my shoulder gently. "Are you ready?" I nodded, not trusting my voice, and walked into the room. It was smaller than I'd expected, with a long conference table and windows that looked out over the street. On one side sat Thomas, Sarah, Michael, and David, my husband's children with Catherine, all of them looking uncomfortable in clothes that were too formal for their usual lives. On the other side sat Daniel and a sharp-eyed lawyer who looked like he ate people for breakfast. And at the far end of the table, in a chair, slightly apart from everyone else, sat a young man I didn't recognize at first. He was thin, with tattoos covering both arms, and a wary expression that made him look like he was ready to bolt at any moment. But he had those eyes, those unmistakable blue eyes. "Joshua," I breathed. He nodded once, curtly, not smiling. "I almost didn't come, but my wife said I'd regret it if I didn't at least hear what you had to say." The mediator, a gray-haired woman with glasses that slipped down her nose, called the meeting to order. Patricia laid out the proposal clearly and concisely. I was voluntarily offering to divide my inheritance equally among all of my late husband's children. The house in Savannah would be sold and the proceeds split. My savings and the insurance money would be redistributed. By the time it was all divided, each child would receive approximately $70,000. Not a fortune, but enough to make a real difference in their lives. "This is insane!" Daniel exploded before the mediator had even finished speaking. "Aunt Eleanor, these people are strangers. You don't owe them anything. Uncle Jim left everything to you because you were his wife, his real wife, and these are his children." I cut him off, my voice shaking but firm. "Children he abandoned, children he promised to care for, and then betrayed. And I will not profit from their suffering one day longer. She's being manipulated." Daniel turned to the mediator desperately. "She's elderly. She's been through trauma. She's not thinking clearly." "I'm 72 years old, not senile," I snapped. "And I've never thought more clearly in my life. You helped him hide this, Daniel. You knew about these children and you said nothing. You're as guilty as he was." The room erupted. Daniel was shouting. His lawyer was threatening legal action. Thomas was on his feet, yelling back. The mediator was banging her gavel, demanding order. And through it all, I sat there with my hands folded on the table, feeling strangely calm. This chaos, this rage, this pain, it was all finally coming to the surface after being buried for so long. Let it burn. Let it all burn down, so something better could grow from the ashes. Finally, Joshua's voice cut through the noise, quiet but commanding. "Shut up. All of you. Just shut up." The room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at him. He was staring at me with an intensity that made me want to look away, but I forced myself to hold his gaze. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "Really, is it guilt? Pity? Some kind of savior complex?" "It's justice," I said simply. "Your father stole your childhood. He stole your mother's life. He stole your brother from you. I can't give any of that back. But I can give you what he promised and never delivered. I can acknowledge that you existed, that you mattered, that you deserved better." Joshua's eyes filled with tears. He blinked them back furiously, his jaw clenched tight. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "My whole life I thought he just didn't want me, that I wasn't good enough, wasn't worth his time. Finding out he had all this money, that he gave it to someone else, while Jacob and I were eating ramen for every meal and sleeping on a mattress we found in a dumpster." He trailed off, unable to continue. "I know," I whispered. "I know, and I'm so sorry." The mediator cleared her throat gently. "Does anyone contest Mrs. Morrison's right to distribute her assets as she sees fit?" Silence. Even Daniel had run out of arguments. "Then let the record show that Eleanor Morrison is voluntarily redistributing her inheritance among the following individuals." As Patricia read out the names and numbers, I watched the faces around the table. Sarah was crying openly, her hands over her mouth. Michael and David sat frozen, like they couldn't quite believe this was real. Thomas had his head bowed, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. And Joshua was staring at his hands, tears dripping onto the table, years of pain and abandonment finally being acknowledged. The paperwork took another month to finalize. A month of signatures and notarizations and wire transfers. A month of watching the number in my bank account dwindle until there was almost nothing left. I kept just enough to rent a small apartment back in Charleston and cover my basic expenses. Everything else, the house, the savings, the insurance money, the investments I thought would secure my retirement, all of it went to the children my husband had abandoned. My sister stopped speaking to me. She sent a letter, not even a phone call, just a cold, formal letter, saying I'd betrayed the family, that I was throwing away my security for people who didn't deserve it, that I'd regret this decision when I was old and poor and alone. I read it once, then threw it in the fireplace and watched it burn. If choosing justice over comfort meant losing my family, then maybe they weren't really family to begin with. The day the house in Savannah sold, I went there one last time. It was empty now. Margaret had helped me clear it out, donating most of the furniture to charity, packing up the photographs and personal items for Thomas and his siblings. I walked through the rooms slowly, my footsteps echoing on the bare floors, saying goodbye to a place that had never really been mine. In the upstairs hallway, where those photographs had hung, there were now just rectangular patches on the wall where the paint was slightly darker. Ghosts of a family I'd never known. I stood there for a long time, thinking about Catherine and Rebecca, about all the women my husband had betrayed. We'd never met, but we were connected by the same man's lies, bound together in a sisterhood of pain we'd never asked to join. "Eleanor?" a voice called from downstairs. "You still here?" I turned to find Sarah climbing the stairs, moving carefully like her body hurt. I knew from Thomas that she'd been working 2 jobs since losing her house, one as a hotel housekeeper, another as a night shift gas station clerk. The money from the inheritance would let her quit both jobs, go back to school, maybe even buy a small house of her own. "I wanted to catch you before you left," she said, slightly breathless from the climb, "to say thank you and to give you something." She held out a small box wrapped in tissue paper. "You don't have to give me anything," I protested. "I'm just trying to fix what he broke." "I know, but I want you to have this anyway." She pressed the box into my hands. "Open it." Inside was a photograph I'd never seen before. It showed a young woman, Catherine, I realized, standing in front of this very house, heavily pregnant and glowing with happiness. She had her hand on her belly and was smiling at whoever held the camera. On the back, in faded ink, someone had written, "Catherine, 1979. 8 months with Thomas. The beginning of everything. Mom gave this to Dad," Sarah explained softly. "He kept it in his wallet until the day he died. I found it when we were going through his things. I think he really did love her. Love all of us. He was just too broken to do it right." The photograph blurred as tears filled my eyes. "I don't know if love is enough when it comes with so much pain," I whispered. "Maybe not," Sarah agreed. "But knowing he felt something, that we weren't just obligations or mistakes, it helps. A little." She paused, studying my face. Are you going to be okay? Financially, I mean. Thomas said you gave away almost everything. I'll be fine, I assured her, and surprisingly, I meant it. I have my Social Security, a small pension from my teaching years. I don't need much. And honestly, Sarah, I sleep better now than I have in months. Money can't buy that. She stepped forward suddenly and hugged me, fierce and tight. You're a better person than he deserved, she whispered against my shoulder. Thank you for seeing us, for acknowledging that we mattered. After she left, I stood in that empty house for a little while longer, holding Catherine's photograph and thinking about all the versions of my husband I'd discovered, the man I'd married, who'd been kind and attentive and made me feel safe. The father Thomas described, who'd been present but distant, always holding part of himself back, the coward who'd seduced his wife's best friend and then abandoned the children that resulted, the man who'd written that unsent will, imagining himself brave enough to make amends while lacking the courage to actually do it. Which one was the real him? Maybe they all were. Maybe people were just collections of contradictions, capable of both great love and terrible cruelty, often at the same time. I locked the house for the last time and left the keys with the realtor. As I drove away, I didn't look back. That chapter of my life, of all our lives, was finally closing. 3 weeks later, I was unpacking boxes in my new apartment in Charleston when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Mrs. Morrison? A male voice, young and uncertain. My name is Jacob Thornton. My heart stopped. The missing son. Rebecca's boy who'd disappeared into the system and never been found. Jacob, I breathed. We've been looking for you everywhere. How did you... Joshua tracked me down, he said. Hired a private investigator with some of the money you gave him. Found me in Seattle. I've been homeless off and on for the past decade. Drug problems, mental health issues. The system really did a number on me and my brother. He laughed, but it was a bitter sound. Joshua said you gave away your whole inheritance to make things right. Said you didn't have to, but you did anyway. I don't really know what to do with that information. You don't have to do anything with it, I said gently. It's not about me. It's about acknowledging what was done to you, what you lost. Your share is waiting for you whenever you're ready. Silence on the other end of the line. Then quietly, why? You didn't know us. We're nothing to you. You're not nothing, I said firmly. You never were. Your father made you feel invisible, but you weren't. You existed, you mattered, and I'm so sorry. It took so long for someone to tell you that. I heard a sound that might have been a sob, quickly stifled. I'm in rehab now, he said after a moment. 90 days. Joshua's helping me pay for it. After I get out, I'm thinking maybe I'll go back to school. I always wanted to be a teacher, like my mom was. Your mother would be proud of you, I said, and meant it. And my father? The question was loaded with years of pain. I thought carefully before answering. Your father was a coward who couldn't face his own mistakes. But that's not a reflection on you. That's on him. You get to decide who you are, Jacob. You get to write your own story, now. After we hung up, I sat on my couch surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace. Not happiness exactly. I wasn't sure I'd ever feel truly happy again, knowing what I now knew about my marriage, about the life I thought I was living, but peace, the peace that comes from knowing you did the right thing, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. The money was gone, my family was gone, the future I'd imagined for myself was gone, but I could look at myself in the mirror again. I could sleep through the night, and somehow that was enough. I thought about what that woman at the farmer's market had said, the one who'd warned me that the children had suffered too. She'd been right. They had suffered, we all had. But suffering didn't have to be the end of the story. Sometimes, if you were lucky, suffering could be the beginning of something better, something truer. That evening, as the sun set over Charleston and painted my new apartment in shades of gold and pink, I took out Catherine's photograph and placed it on my mantel. Next to it, I put a picture Margaret had given me, the one of all 4 children together, smiling at the camera with their father standing behind them, his hands on their shoulders. My husband had spent his life keeping secrets, building walls between the different pieces of himself, making sure none of us ever saw the full picture. But I could see it now, all of it, the good and the bad, the love and the lies, the man he was, and the man he could never quite manage to become. And finally, after 43 years of marriage and 6 months of widowhood, I understood the most important truth. His choices were his burden to carry, but my choices, what I did with the knowledge I'd gained, how I responded to the pain he'd caused, those were mine, and I chose forgiveness, not for him, for me, for Catherine, for Rebecca, for all of us who'd loved a man who didn't know how to love himself enough to be honest. Today, when people ask me about my late husband, I tell them the truth. He was complicated, flawed, human, and through his failures, he taught me the most valuable lesson I've ever learned, that silence destroys more than truth ever could, that secrets are just another form of abandonment, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is face the consequences of someone else's cowardice and choose to make it right anyway. Sometimes the hardest truths are the ones that force us to rewrite our entire history. I spent 43 years believing I knew the man I slept beside every night, only to discover he was a stranger wearing a familiar face. But here's what I learned through all that pain, through all those sleepless nights and devastating revelations. We don't get to control what others do to us, but we absolutely control how we respond. My husband chose lies. He chose cowardice. He chose to build walls between the people who loved him instead of bridges. But I chose differently. I chose to face the ugly truths instead of hiding behind comfortable denial. I chose justice over bitterness. And in doing so, I finally found something he never had: peace. So I ask you, what would you have done in my place? If you discovered your entire life had been a carefully constructed lie, would you have the courage to tear it all down and rebuild from the rubble? Would you give away your security to make amends for sins you didn't commit? Or would you close that door, walk away, and pretend you never saw what was hidden inside? These aren't easy questions, and there are no perfect answers. But I believe that how we respond to betrayal defines us far more than the betrayal itself ever could. We can let it poison us, or we can let it transform us into someone stronger, braver, more honest than we ever thought possible. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the secrets we keep and the truths we avoid, then I invite you to follow this channel for more stories that will touch your heart and challenge your perspective. Leave a like if you believe that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to do what's right despite it. And please, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, someone who might be struggling with their own painful truths. Because sometimes knowing we're not alone in our suffering is the first step toward healing. Thank you for listening to my story. May you always have the courage to choose truth over comfort, and may you never underestimate the power of doing what's right, even when it costs you everything.